Pastor Ed here with Daily Devotions for Wednesday, October the 1st. Can you believe it? 2025. And yesterday we began discussion this week of spiritual gifts. I noted that the authors of Life Keys divide basically the 20 spiritual gifts that Paul talks about in the New Testament into four categories: the gifts of the heart, gifts of proclamation, gifts of action, and gifts of inspiration. I want to now start talking a little bit more about that. First of all, saying that came across a piece I think is indicative of often how we don't appreciate or make use of the spiritual gifts that already exist among us. A fellow by the name of Juan Lane says, I was talking to one of my friends from the islands, and he was explaining how the people on his island love mangoes. And he went ahead to explain how mangoes were also the leading fruit import to the island, and how they would sometimes see the prices raised on these imported mangoes. Well, the second part to the story, and the most important part, he says, is the fact that he told me that their island was actually filled with mango trees, and there were so many mango trees that the mangoes would fall and create a problem for the people to have to deal with. Now, this gentleman, being a businessman, said, I immediately asked myself, if they have an abundance of mangoes available and a great demand for mangoes right there where they live, why would they sit there and render such a blessing from God useless? And he goes on to say, this is the same thing that we do when we go out searching and to help us with things that we already have within us. We're denying the very existence and the purpose of the people that God has planted or already around us. In other words, God has already given them the spiritual gifts that we need. There are so many resources that are untapped and unused in the church. He says that we should really be ashamed that we'd have to go anywhere else for help. God has someone lined up who specializes in dealing with every situation. Again, gifts of the heart, gifts of proclamation, gifts of action, gifts of inspiration. Research has shown that 29% of all adults and 40% of younger adults have actually never heard of spiritual gifts, rather high figures. 69% have heard of spiritual gifts but have no idea what their spiritual gift is. That kind of says it all, that so many people don't understand the concept, and even those who do don't understand or have no sense of what their spiritual gift might be. That's why we use the spiritual gifts assessment tool in church on Sunday, and have available. I'll have copies out for the next several weeks as well, and maybe I'll look into seeing whether Josh can put it up online for you to access that way. Again, this idea that we have these gifts that we don't use. The Detroit News once wrote a humor story about an elderly woman that kind of perfectly illustrates how useless gifts are unless they are used. She had been raised in poverty. The family had very little money as the children were growing up. And so as a result, she never had any modern conveniences, had gotten accustomed to doing things the old-fashioned way, the hard way, in fact. Well, when her children were old enough to get jobs, they often would give their mother appliances as Christmas gifts to make her life a little bit easier. But she wouldn't use them. They especially remembered that after a while, their mother had 2 or 3 toasters, but she left them in their boxes and just stuck them on top of the refrigerator. And at breakfast, she would still do toast in the oven the way she always had. And if her children protested, she would say, leave them on the refrigerator. I'm used to doing it the old way. Reading this made me think of, or brought up for me a boyhood memory. In my grandmother's house, I had 2 maiden aunts. In other words, they'd never married. They lived all their life in the same home that they'd grown up in with my grandmother. And at one point, they decided to remodel the kitchen, and they got a brand new oven, beautiful new oven that they never used. They still had this old-fashioned type uh, portable oven thing down in the basement. And so even when there was company and everybody coming over for years, I don't know if they ever really even used the brand spanking brand new oven. They would go downstairs to cook the turkey or the roast or whatever the case may be. It's that idea that you've got this, in this sense, they had the tool they needed. It was right there to be used, but they didn't use it. And I guess, we can think of all kinds of other illustrations and analogies. Well, that's one of the ways of thinking about spiritual gifts. When we don't understand that they exist, and when we don't understand what our own spiritual gifts might be, not only do we lose out, but certainly the body of Christ, the church, and indeed, as the church reaches out through these gifts to affect the world, the whole world loses out. So unused and untapped is not the words we should use to describe spiritual gifts. Well, we'll continue the conversation tomorrow. Hope you have a great day today. Until then, take care.